Wait, Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Cleese, and welcome to our discussion, the evolution of the office space and technology in the roaring 2020s. We've got a bit more time to go, but it's roaring ahead. My name is John Cleese. I'm a consultant with Achurch Consulting. Before we get started, I do have a couple of housekeeping things that we need to talk about. First, everyone is on mute. But we welcome questions, of course, and ask that you please either use the Q&A box or the chat to reach out to us, and we'll try to get to your questions later on in the Q&A session. Also, everyone will receive 2 follow-up emails from me. One is going to contain the link to this recording, as well as the link to a very quick survey that will take about 3 minutes or less for you to tell us about what you like, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see us talk about in the future. And then you'll get a second email because you haven't heard enough from us that contains your CAE credits for attending today, and you can keep these for your files. So let's get started. We are very excited, and I first want to introduce you to our panelists. Again, my name is John Cleese, and I'm going to start with Rae Ann Johnson of Achurch Consulting. And Rae Ann Johnson is a senior legal policy and operations advisor at Achurch. She focuses on remote and hybrid work initiatives. She's a former association COO and general counsel who has been a remote worker for the last 6 years. We also have Dan Shapiro from Cresa, and Dan is a senior vice president at Cresa who has been exclusively representing occupiers of commercial space for over 16 years. He's the co-founder of Cresa's national government contractor practice group and specializes in implementing real estate strategies for both public and private companies, as well as associations and not-for-profit organizations. Erik Haas from designDATA is our other speaker. Erik Haas is vice president of business development for designDATA, who has been empowering organizations to do their best work with technology for the past 40 years. They do this by striving to see the world through their clients' eyes, aligning IT operations with organizational priorities, and ensuring staff have the resources they need to excel. So with that, we are very excited because we're able to bring together representatives and speakers, people in the hybrid workspace, technology in the hybrid workspace, and space in the hybrid workspace. So without further ado, we're going to kick it off with Rae Ann Johnson from Achurch Consulting. Rae Ann?
Hi, John, and everyone out there in our, thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We're very excited to be here talking about the future of work and what that's going to look like. One of the things that we do here at Achurch, as John mentioned, is we help organizations go either fully remote or help them craft a really optimized hybrid work experience. And we've been doing that for over 2 years now. So pre-pandemic, we were actually helping organizations in that endeavor. And recently, what Achurch has been doing is working with associations to help them really identify where they can optimize their efforts when they're thinking about or planning to go remote and hybrid. And recently we launched a survey of over 300 association executives, asking them about what they see as the future of their workspace. And I wanted to share just a few snippets of data from that because I think that it helps set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, I don't think that any of this information is going to be totally shocking to you, although it is very interesting because, pre-pandemic, the vast majority of the workforce, over 85%, were all or mostly on-site. Most of us worked from an on-site office atmosphere. But currently, 83% are working mostly remote or hybrid. So that data has flipped, and most of us are spending a lot of time working at home or have spent a lot of time working from home, especially over the past 18 to 24 months. But when we surveyed our folks, what they indicated to us is that 79% are planning or considering a hybrid or fully remote workforce moving forward. And I think the point that we found most interesting about that was that only 4% of those who participated in our survey indicated that they're intending to go back to a traditional 5-day-a-week in-office environment, work environment. So as you can see, hybrid is very top of mind for most of the organizations, as well as, helping those remote workers when they're working from home. So of those who were all On-site pre-pandemic, 65% are planning to go hybrid. So that's a very high number. We think that that is the future of work. And so what we do at Achurch is we help organizations move in that hybrid direction, but move toward it purposefully with intentionality. We were all thrown into working from home or working remotely because of the pandemic. Now we have the opportunity to be intentional about it. And that's what the great promise of hybrid is. It helps to mesh leader ideals with employee autonomy. So oftentimes we're seeing a disconnect between what leadership wants and what employees want and expect in their work environment. And I think that with a hybrid model, you can meet both of those needs, both the leader's needs and the employee needs for greater flexibility and for autonomy in where and when and how they work. A hybrid model also helps with talent retention and with attraction of new employees because many employees are used to working in the time and place and space that works best for them. And we want to make sure that we're continuing to optimize our work efforts. So that helps to attract and to retain the talent that you already have within your organizations. There's also an opportunity or greater opportunity for workforce development. So many people can now participate in professional development activities, and they can do that remotely, or they can do that on site. So there's a greater opportunity to really develop those skills and kind of develop that muscle memory that we like to call it for working both remotely and in an office environment. I think one of the things that we're going to really focus on today is the opportunity for broader and more effective collaboration within a hybrid model, because we've all been able to figure out a way to collaborate online or remotely. But whenever you have the opportunity to bring everybody together in a space so that they're, physically occupying the same space, it does broaden that opportunity for collaboration. And finally, the thing that we don't want to overlook is the opportunity for cost savings. So there can be, I think that Dan will be happy to talk to you about the space needs and how, perhaps a reduction or a reimagination of your office space could help save some money that you can then redirect back into the mission and operations of the organization. At Achurch, one of the things that we've identified over the past few years is how distributed workforces work best. And we've identified 5 essential elements of a really optimized distributed workforce. And I'll just touch on a few of those here today. The first is communications. Communications are absolutely essential to making sure that your organization is moving forward, that people are being productive, that you're being efficient, and you're able to communicate with each other, being very transparent about what's happening in the organization so that you can all be moving forward together. Operations obviously are a critical component of any workforce because you want to make sure that you're meeting all of the logistics, all of the legal, all of the financial obligations of the organization. But also, this is an area we will be focusing very specifically on today because it deals with the space and with the technology that you're using to really keep your organization at its optimal best. And then the other areas that we focus on within Achurch are obviously things like manager development, making sure that your managers know how to work in a remote and or hybrid environment, making sure that your employees are engaged while they're working there, and promoting the best parts of your organization's culture, making sure that you don't lose the things that you really thought made your organization special and work well. We want to make sure that those continue regardless of where your employees are physically located. So in terms of operations, I think there are a couple of things that really help guide the efforts in from an operations standpoint. One is it helps assess organizational strengths and opportunities for improvement for making transparent decisions. So that's one of the things that we focus on within Achurch. We help organizations identify those strengths. What are the things that you can lean on and leverage so that you can make sure that you are really moving your organization forward, even when not everyone is in the same room together? You can still work together effectively as a team. We also help organizations update and implement fair and equitable policies so that they can ensure that they are working well together in a hybrid remote work environment. And we also want to help organizations ensure that they are having easy access, but also secure access to their data and files and things that you're sharing whenever you're not physically co-located. I I think the two things that we're going to focus on really today are identifying the appropriate technology tools and being very purposeful about what you're choosing. Why do you need to select a specific tool, and which tools are best for the environment that you're trying to create? And then finally, how can you reevaluate your office space needs? Perhaps you were in an all office environment in the office and everyone was sort of separated. Maybe now's the time to reconsider how you design that office space so you can really use it most effectively. And again, be very purposeful and intentional about what you're doing. And so, the three key questions that we really focus on whenever organizations come to us and ask about how we can help them go hybrid or implement a hybrid work model is the first question: how do we optimize our operations? What can we do more effectively? What can we be thinking about that maybe we don't even know to ask a question about? And then second, what technology tools do we really need to help promote our hybrid work model? And finally, what do we do with our current office space? That's probably the number one question that we get asked by organizations who are ready to go back into the office for at least a certain portion of time, but they're not ready to go back fully, or they don't intend to go back fully. So what is it that they can do with their current office space? And I think I have the man here who can help us discuss that and what some options might be. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Rae Ann. So as Rae Ann was saying, now we have sort of figured out what our workforce strategy is. So at Cresa, we're a corporate real estate firm that exclusively represents occupiers of space. We're helping our clients implement that workforce strategy into a workplace strategy. So looking at the spectrum here of what the office traditionally was in status quo, 200 to 300 square feet per person. Dedicated seat environment. You come in 4 to 5 days a week. You have your office or your workstation that you're in every single day. We're looking now, given that this remote work experiment is proving successful, what does a hybrid strategy look like? What does it mean to the physical space? What does it mean to our budget? Well, it means that we can get more efficient. We can get more people working in less space. And now the workplace shifts from that dedicated heads down work environment into a vehicle for connection. So we'll have a combination of assigned seating for people that are going to be in 3+ days a week, and unassigned seating for people that are dropping in for project specific tasks or meeting. And on the far opposite end, we have our innovation hub, which is truly an unassigned environment. Basically touchdown stations for anyone that wants to come in and not meant for long-term projects. Let me go to the next slide. So post-pandemic, space is going to change to support this hybrid work environment. We need to create spaces that are going to bring people in so that they can collaborate and meet. So the focus is increasing on the collaborative space, and this needs to be enabled with technology. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But looking at a holistic view of your real estate situation, your real estate portfolio, to support this staff that's in the office and connect them with staff that's out of the office. And more importantly, having both formal and informal meeting settings for those projects that are taking place within the physical space. The focus is decreasing on that 1-to-1 assigned seating ratio, meaning one workstation for one employee. There is no more one size fits all. And this notion that we've had in the past that you can only be productive at your desk in the office is certainly changing. Go to the next one. Great. So what do employees want? What are we hearing from our clients? Well, they want to be comfortable in the space, and that's physical and psychological. And so wellness has taken a big step forward in terms of what employees want in their spaces. Obviously, with the pandemic, the concern for spread, air filtration systems, and fresh air is incredibly important. Every building now is adopting to certain standards that require a majority of the air coming in fresh from the outside. Most buildings now are also activating outdoor spaces. So you have buildings with rooftops, with courtyards, and pulling those elements in so that even if you're coming into the office to work, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to sit in your office space. You can spread out throughout the building common areas and these amenities to make everybody feel more comfortable in these open air environments. And really, the de-densification of the floor plan, meaning we're not trying to cram as many people as possible into this office space. What we're doing is we're creating times where people can come into work and not have as much congestion and overlap. So within the physical space, we're moving from that all offices on the perimeter, workstations and conference room in the center, to a very open, flexible, and movable environment where you can have various areas throughout the space, as you see here, based on the activity that you're working on versus just sitting down and doing heads down work all day. So for instance, meeting space doesn't just have to be formal conference rooms anymore. We can have cafes and pantries that allow for collaboration, allow for collision points throughout the space to share ideas, but not in a formal setting. You can go to the next one. Great. So the main concept though here in hybrid means we have people in the office and people out of the office. So we have to be able to merge the remote workers with the in-office workers. And we do that through technology. So companies are constantly looking now for easy standardized technology for people that will be in the space to connect with those that are out of the space. And our friends from designDATA and Erik are going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And now to get sort of into the bottom line of what we can help with and what we're doing with most of our clients now is figuring out what to do with this excess space. So you're under a lease from historical planning, and not everybody's coming to the office anymore. Probably not everybody's coming to the office for the foreseeable future. So we're sitting on an extra 10, 20, 30% excess space that we're paying for. So what's going to happen is redesigning this workplace again to support the hybrid state. So we're getting away from the dedicated seating in the dark blue individual work areas and moving into collaborative and unassigned seating areas. And on the next slide, overall, what you can see is that across the board, regardless of organization type, what we're seeing by making this shift from assigned to unassigned is on average a 35% reduction in space. So obviously this drops huge savings to the bottom line for companies that no longer need this full amount of space. And what it means is really proactively planning for the future and for this flexibility. And the market is such right now that it doesn't matter if you have 2 years, 3 years, 4 years left on a lease. We're having success with our clients negotiating for early breaks and early reductions of cost on those leases because they're never going to use that space again. And so given that, again, the central concept being how do we connect the people in the office and out of the office, and we do it through uniform technology. I'm going to hand it over to Erik, who's going to speak more to that topic about how we collaborate.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I thought it might be helpful to set the stage by talking a little bit about designDATA's philosophy when it comes to all this. And so, we firmly believe that hybrid work is here to stay. It's certainly been accelerated by COVID, but not driven by it. What's really driving it is a couple things. Employees increasingly prioritizing flexibility and when, where, and how they work. What the CEO of LinkedIn, and I like this, called not the Great Resignation, but the Great Reshuffle, which describes basically employees' desire to evolve the social contract with their employer, essentially asking, I work for designDATA, but does designDATA work for me? And so hybrid isn't something that we're going to do until we get back to the office. It is the future. And I think it's important to recognize that the organizations that turn distributed work into a core competency will be able to attract and retain great people and thus really do the best work for those they serve. They'll have a massive competitive advantage. So with that in mind, the question is, what role does technology play? And perhaps could start by saying the role that it doesn't play. And it's not the place to start. If you fuse new tools with outdated habits and business practices, it doesn't make teams more collaborative. The applications by themselves don't change the way we communicate, and the ways in which they do might not be best for your team. Thus, as Rae Ann said, intentionality is key here. Second, there are lots of technologies that we could implement and extremely easily. It used to be that it was a technical feat to implement a new piece of collaboration or productivity software. Microsoft 365 has like 40 apps that you can turn on and start using right now. But doing so spreads the organization in 15 different directions. And thus, the important task is examining the work that you do, who you do it with, and how, so that you can focus limited resources and really tolerance for change on the areas that are going to have the biggest impact. So the three areas where we see having the most significant impact right now in the technology space, and it obviously depends on organization and where they are and where they're planning to go, but in general, is first and foremost, organizing work into a single collaboration hub like Microsoft Teams, Slack, or Zoom. This is the single initiative that'll make the biggest impact on your team's ability to communicate, collaborate, and find valuable information. A stat that I thought was pretty staggering is that I believe it came from McKinsey. Is the average team member spends between 25 and 35% of their time searching for information they need to do their job. So thus that hub becomes the single, easily searchable well of all knowledge in the organization. It becomes a single place for both real-time and time-independent collaboration. Catchphrases being synchronous and asynchronous collaboration in all its forms, whether that be video, phone, chat, document editing. And it allows you to structure your conversations in a way that provides important context, like by project, department, or team, and focus your energy and attention on your top priorities. When you compare that to email, for instance, where the last in's the first up, no matter who it's from or what it's about. Second is implement the most meaningful hybrid meeting technology for you and your organization. This is by far the most, there are lots of shiny objects here when it comes to remote meeting technology. First, this requires being intentional at the company and team level about which meetings absolutely need to be hybrid, because it is by far the most complex format. Design meetings from a remote first standpoint. So thinking about the remote participant experience first. Unfortunately, remote participants are often considered as an afterthought, and that really disadvantages everyone and the conversation being had. And in doing so, often the best place to start, people tend to focus on video, but it's really audio. The ability for remote participants to clearly hear and be heard is by far the most important piece of this. And, as an example, I was talking to a COO at a large nonprofit the other day, and they were explaining how at their board meeting, 50% of the participants were in the same physical space, the other 50% not. And there was an incredibly contentious board vote where obviously everyone would want to kind of weigh in. And it was incredibly difficult to hear the people in the room, to the extent that those on the line didn't even know if the vote had taken place and what the results are. So when you talk about disenfranchising members of that team, I mean, that's a perfect example, and audio can obviously help there, among other things. And then, we can start talking about the cool stuff like life-size remote participants, where cameras are at eye level to facilitate better eye contact. They're smart enough to pick up the individual attendees in a room and put them in their own Zoom box, so to speak. And then, go from there. It's a matter of incrementally maturing that capability. And lastly, ensuring every staff member has the needed hardware, software, and connectivity to contribute. Never in my life have I heard somebody express the sentiment, I love accessing the files I need through my VPN or terminal server. I've never heard those words put together in that order ever. One of the more fundamental recommendations, thus, is to support hybrid work, is to migrate critical data and applications into the cloud, protected by multi-factor authentication. Second prong is ensuring all staff have modern hardware and software versions. Too often, sluggish equipment or outdated software becomes a barrier to collaboration. 2016 survey found that US businesses lose up to $1.8 billion each year in wasted productivity due to obsolete technology. So investing in technology is expensive, but not doing so is more expensive. And I want to end on what I believe to be one of the most important considerations in regards to equity. We're seeing a need for businesses to reevaluate their role in supporting their staff's home offices. It really can't and shouldn't be that any individual's ability to meaningfully contribute to their organization be limited by financial hurdles that the employee must bear. Not to mention that Dan's going to save us all millions of dollars on real estate. So we need to be considering how we can reallocate some of those resources to empower our people. the same resources you would provide in the office, it's not unreasonable for staff to expect in a home work environment if that's truly being supported and incentivized by the organization. And with that, recognize we're all just kind of scratching the surface on all this. I'll turn it over to John Cleese to open up the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Erik. I appreciate it. Oh my gosh. I want to wear a t-shirt. I love my VPN, just to turn you wrong, but you are correct.
Oh man,
nobody likes the VPN.
Something new every day.
But you know what, Erik, I'm going to start with you first. Tons of questions, and we've got some great stuff in the chat. I want to let people know I am monitoring the chat. You talk about the collaboration hubs, because I'm surprised, and maybe you are too, how many people still don't see that as a central piece for going hybrid. And you mentioned it as one of the pillars for success. So talk to us about the process of maybe how people need to choose that, and then maybe what are some of the pitfalls for implementing and getting people to use that, if in fact that is a central tenet for their technology.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Really good question. As far as choosing the right one, there are a lot of considerations like cost, which applications you're already using. If you have critical secondary applications, do they connect to the primary hub, whether it be Teams or Zoom or Slack? And I guess one place I would caution people not to give too much consideration to there is a specific feature that is specific to one of those hubs at the moment. All of them are being fast followers with one another. So what is a unique feature one day to one is pervasive through all of them the next day. As far as critical success factors or challenges, and I really see it as two sides to the same coin. It starts with leadership modeling the way. One of the most pervasive challenges we see with widespread implementation is members of the leadership team continuing to communicate and collaborate in the ways that they always have. And when the epicenter of power and influence is pulling collaboration away from the collaboration hub, adoption stays low. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where the value of the hub gets exponentially better the more people that are using it. Couple other thoughts, the consultative piece prior to adoption. These collaboration hubs are, like houses. Once you move all your furniture in and start living in it, it becomes much harder to re-architect the house. It's important that organizations really assess the way departments and teams collaborate and get work done, what applications are currently in use throughout the organization, where critical files currently live, and it's usually in several places, and then develop sound governance and standards around how that should function going forward. And,
leadership modeling behavior, we hear that all the time, right, for everything. In fact, and one thing I want to open up to the rest of the panelists too, to Dan and Rae Ann, because you mentioned as well, Erik, is all three of you mentioned purpose. And purpose when starting either with the people and what they want, with the technology and what we need, or with the space. So my question to the three of you is, why does it feel like leadership is just not being more purposeful about this return to work? There seems to be a real disconnect between what employees are wanting, what management wants, but even if there's differences, starting with the purpose, why is that? Why is that such a barrier right now? Do you guys have any insight for that?
So John, I think one of the things that we're seeing with our clients is that there's a pull for leadership to want to know and see, and they feel like they can't know and see unless they are physically seeing people. And so what we've advised, or what we talk to our clients about, is about, you don't know, just because somebody is sitting in their office doesn't mean that they're actually engaged in the activity of work. They could be sitting there Amazon shopping. The holidays are coming up. They could be spending some time there. They could be doing other things, writing notes to their, teachers or whatever. But trying to maintain that focus on getting the work done doesn't necessarily mean that a butt in a seat is getting the work done. And so what we've worked with is trying to help leaders understand that you can still help your organization be very efficient and effective without having to implement, I think there was something in the chat about kind of like spying technology or technology that helps you monitor exactly where people, what websites people are visiting and, how much time they're spending on a task and things like that. We sort of discourage that with our clients because we want there to be a trust factor built there within the organization. You've trusted your folks for the past 18 months to be working from home. We've seen lots of numbers. There are numbers coming out of, Harvard Business Review and other organizations that demonstrate that productivity and efficiency has actually increased while people have been working from home because they have a less distraction potentially. So again, it goes back to building a culture, goes back to leadership modeling good behavior and really trusting that the flexibility that employees are asking for and the autonomy that flexibility is that employees are asking for actually is being demonstrated while they're working, even if they're working remotely.
No, good point. And Dan, you too, because for somebody to give up their space and to hear also, people that just sort of come in, but like, do you have a hard time walking through them with that, or do you need to lead them through that same sort of, how do you, I should say, lead them through that same purposeful process to figure out how much space I actually need?
Yeah, I mean, John, it's two separate groups of thinking here. It's in what we see, and we start every project now with a remote work survey amongst the employees, and it's the executive mentality, which for the most part is I want to see people in the office getting work done. And the employee mentality is I want flexibility and I want to be able to work from home. And so the response rate on almost every single remote survey we do reflects that 95% of the time that people, if they had to pick, they don't want to get dressed, get in the car and drive somewhere for an hour to go to work. And so, I think culture is built by the executives leading by example, as Rae Ann mentioned, within the organization. It's not built by the physical space itself, but it is very important to keep this stuff in mind. At the end of the day, there will be those organizations, and I think Rae Ann used the stat of 4% that are going to go back 100% of the time, 5 days a week, because it's just how we've been working for 100 years. So, but the companies that need to fight for talent and attract employees have to offer these options now because their competitors are.
Right. Yeah, it is true. I think, Erik, I forgot your term. It wasn't the great resignation, the great reshuffle. I think that's what you said, right? The great.
Wish I could claim it, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It is happening, and we know that's been happening. And actually, I want to pick up what Dan said, because you've all sort of mentioned culture. So if, let's just say somebody does sort of think about the purpose of why I need, what my people want, the technology my space needs, how do you incorporate the culture piece of it? Because that seems to be what we hear over and over again. So how would, I would say and I kind of think of you all as the three sort of pillars, right? People, technology, space. How do you work culture into what you all are doing? Because we know that's a concern. And I think it was some people in the chat said that too.
Yeah, John. So I think, one thing is starting with that. Why are you bringing folks together? What is the purpose of bringing folks, whether it's into an office space or whether, a collaborative space, and recognizing that going hybrid or becoming hybrid or being intentionally hybrid is more than just, handing employees a laptop, maybe it's a souped up laptop, and putting a schedule, on your intranet that says these folks come in Monday, Wednesday, these other folks come in Tuesday, Thursday. It's really about having a purpose for when you're getting there. And when you do that, it helps promote the culture. If you're thinking about it intentionally, you're engaged with your teams and you're asking them the question about what do you need? What do you need to work effectively? And that's, I think Dan mentioned this, that they work with their clients to do a survey at the beginning. We do a survey as well. We survey, and we highly recommend that organizations, conduct these surveys with their teams so that they can understand their the meaning that work is for their employees, how they work best, what tools or tips or spaces they need to be more effective, even if they are coming into the office. Because, oftentimes we work, we have a client group that we work with that has a bunch of engineers. Many engineers are in their workforce, and they want to get together to whiteboard. They find the energy, the innovation, the creativity gets promoted a little bit more whenever they're in the same space together. So they've decided that whenever they need to brainstorm, they come together specifically for that purpose. And then that helps promote their culture, because then the teams feel like they're being listened to. They feel like their leadership understands them. They feel like, they can be active contributors. And so it's that combination then of again, what you just said, the people, the space, and the technology all coming together for a specific purpose. And that seems to really engage the culture of the organization. It really seems to get that a promotion.
Yeah, really, really appreciate what you just said, Rae Ann. I just want to jump off that for a moment and say, a lot of times we're asking the question, how do we replicate, the culture we have in this new environment? And when you think about some of the opportunities in hybrid work, like, accessing a larger talent pool, really working towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, by bringing in more diverse perspectives, you are almost by definition going to evolve the culture, either intentionally or unintentionally. So you mentioned before, John, why is it that people maybe aren't doing this as deliberately? And I feel like they are for once. And that is like part of the challenge, is that we're all trying to, when everyone's in the office or everyone's at home, the way we work is kind of there by default, but now we're challenging those default settings and saying, like, what work do we absolutely need to be in person for? What kind of culture do we want to build? And it's allowing us to ask and answer those questions at a deeper level than many of us had been thinking about up until recently, now that we have options to be in the office, out of the office.
I like to think that when we first got all the technology, all it did was increase our days to like 12, 15 hours. People could reach us wherever we were. Now that technology can finally work to us, our benefit, right, for the flexibility that can offer. So now we really sort of get to the good use of it. But Erik, I wanted to follow up because your story with the board, I think the board decision, you got people on the phone, you got people in the office. To me, this also touches space, Dan, right? How you're going to lay out conference rooms, the technology, Erik and Rae Ann, the people. How, and that's just all of you again, how does technology help with that? And then Rae Ann, as Erik speaks, I also wonder, I believe in listening to this is that we actually need to retrain meeting leaders how to conduct hybrid meetings, because I don't think people are really good at them when you've got half the people in a conference room and half the people somewhere else. So Erik, how does technology help with that piece of it? Because that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually want to just recognize that I appreciate the question. How do you solve it in this specific instance? Because that's a much easier question to ask than what general hybrid office technology should we be investing in, which is right, a bigger picture question. As far as like using that as an example, right? It was mentioning audio and the importance of on both sides of the equation. So my understanding is in this situation, there was a single kind of speaker phone in the middle, thinking about, distributing microphones right across the table, across the room. And if not, being intentional about where that is, as well as on the other side. Some staff members have their computer on a dock on the other side of the room, and that's also where their mic is coming from. Do we need, individual microphones for people who are at home? On the vote itself, like there are phone-based apps that support polling and voting. And, beyond that, it's really the stuff like having a member of the team in the room be a representative of those that are remote. Like often it's really uncomfortable saying like, Mr. Chairman, I can't hear you. Can you come closer? So if there's somebody in the room who's responsible for being that liaison in between sessions, they can kind of act, hey, they can't see the whiteboard, right? And then, checking in with remote participants intentionally and not going around the physical room and then there, but really trying to integrate remote and physically present attendees into the conversation, because otherwise it sends the message that there is an us and a them.
I love the idea of designating, and Rae Ann, to you for the people stuff. That's a great idea. I haven't heard that, designating someone to be the representative for the remote people that are stuck on the little star phone, or maybe we get to, or maybe they've got their face up on the screen. But Rae Ann, you guys do training for that? Like, you see a need for that?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely do. And we definitely work with organizations, because one of the things we're seeing, John, is that the middle manager, that term probably came up, I don't know, 50 years ago, but the middle manager, we're really seeing that actually play out these days because managers are stuck between the leadership that wants something to happen in a certain way or shape or form, and having their teams. The managers have a team that they have to try to direct and support and provide information to. And so they're squeezed in the middle right now because the leadership wants the manager to really espouse the work of the organization, and the teams, the remote workers and employees, they're looking to their manager for guidance and direction. And so there's a big burden that's placed on managers right now. And I think one of the things that we talk about is how can we help train managers to be both the team leader and the person who's really, reflecting the views of the organization and helping to propel that organization forward. And so things like, I love that example there, Erik. Often we would talk about having somebody be a designated maybe timekeeper for a meeting, so that would be the person that would keep their eye on the clock and raise their hand whenever somebody was going overtime or we needed to move on to the next thing. But having somebody designated to be that remote representative to make sure that people are working well together. And, so we would help organizations, we have helped organizations on remote manager training very specifically so that they can understand and learn these tips and tricks and techniques for how they can really work well with their teams and with their leadership.
More stuff for managers to do, right?
Yes, more stuff.
Hey, Dan, what are you seeing in space planning? Because I think, we all know about sort of collaboration spaces, but in your experience lately, more recently, how are people approaching conference rooms? Are they approaching this sort of like hybrid first? I think Erik is sort of remote first, had said that terminology, but how are they thinking about them? And are they thinking about them in this way?
Yeah, I think it's two things really. It's making most of the space into meeting areas. So not necessarily needing huge dedicated large conference rooms within your own space, because frankly, most commercial office buildings now offer conference centers as a free amenity to tenants. So we can shift that off our budget. If we're only having large meetings once a month or once a quarter, we don't need to plan for that. What we need in our office is impromptu meeting spaces, flexible meeting spaces that work when people are going to decide to come in from home and get together for a project or a specific task. And so really tying back into your last question about technology, the one thing that we're hearing from our surveys is when I come into the office, I need a tech-enabled workplace to make use of the full footprint. So I'm not going and sitting on a docking station anymore. I may be for checking email for 10 minutes, but then I'm going to be over in the cafe. So I need easy to use technology to access wirelessly wherever I am in the office, because all of a sudden now everything becomes a meeting area.
So just to make sure I heard that correctly. So if you're in those sort of larger office buildings, the trend is for people to sort of use those built-in facilities and use the smaller, collapsible, movable, whatever spaces within their office footprint.
Yeah. Flexibility is the big thing, right? And so it's flexibility planning when it comes to that stuff. And so we're having multi-purpose rooms within the space. So your cafe, pantry, eat area can have movable tables that can be put together and turns into a meeting space. Or your offices are now designed as 4-person meeting rooms, but could be converted if we end up growing, or could be collapsed if we end up shrinking.
As a cook, I'm a huge proponent of putting kitchens in all of these, because my feeling is if everybody's out of the office now, bring them back into the office to come together. You don't need to go out to restaurants anymore. But I want to pick up on a phrase you said, because I love it. I think you said collision spaces or collision areas. How do you go about mapping out, and I want a deep collision space. I want everybody to smash into each other somewhere. How do you go about mapping that out in the office, and sort of like, what are some of the top places to collide, so to speak, for people to run into each other?
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. So this started years ago with, how do we plan coffee stations and pantries to bring in people from remote sides of the office? So let's put it in the center. So that if I'm working down one wing and a colleague's down the other wing, we'll end up meeting in the middle at some point throughout the day, and we can have that socialization, that ideation that we need as part of this collision. But now it's, let's set up furniture in the office where, I mean, in my office here, we set up a little living room where we have a TV, a meeting area, a couple of couches. So it's just somewhere you find 2 or 3 people getting together throughout the day that's comfortable. So instead of, again, having 2, 3, 4 conference rooms centralized in one area, now we're creating these islands throughout the space where people can sit together, can collaborate outside of your traditional conference setting.
Oh, interesting. I love it. Rae Ann, I had a question for you about, I forget who had mentioned it in terms of sort of talent retention. On the people side of all of this, of the hybrid movement, what are the top couple of concerns that leadership has in terms of this? Like, is it space? Is it technology? Is it something different from that? What are they thinking?
Well, I think definitely space and technology are always top of mind for the leadership who is thinking through, trying to be purposeful. I mean, what we're seeing is that more of, and I think Erik mentioned this at the very beginning, is, leadership has to be the role model. And so they have to model the behavior that they're looking for in order for the rest of the organization to follow. And I think that goes along with everything. So we work with one client whose leadership was hesitant. They wanted to be in the office all the time, yet they wanted to promote their staff, being hybrid. And so one of the pieces of feedback we gave them was, you need to think about how you as a leadership team is going to also be hybrid, because you need to be modeling that same behavior. You can't always be in the room and potentially, having sidebar conversations with people and having people that are not in the office during those sidebar conversations feeling left out. That totally promotes the us versus them experience. And you don't want to do that, because then that is what's going to impact your talent retention. If you have a very talented team of individuals who are working in your organization already, you don't want to risk alienating them by creating that us versus them atmosphere. And so you want to be able to promote the fact that you're giving them flexibility, that you're treating everybody equitably and fairly, and that as an organization, you're moving forward together with purpose. And so that's some of what we talk to the leaders about, because they're not always on board. There's this tug, this eternal tug for traditionalism. And even though we've been through this pandemic and we've seen that the positive outcomes from it in terms of productivity and maintaining organizational structure, there's still something about that traditional in-office experience that keeps tugging at leaders. And so it's about moving beyond that.
Yeah, Rae Ann, as you're talking, I'm thinking that's exactly why organizations need to work with, somebody like Achurch Consulting, because in my head, I'm thinking to myself, the reason people do that is because that playbook is already well defined, right? That it is difficult to intentionally redesign the way you work. That is not easy. And so I think sometimes the default setting is just to go back to, we're creatures of comfort, what we're used to. So.
What I find interesting too is it feels to me seems like a decade ago, before the pandemic, right? The biggest talk was about millennials and how millennials were changing the workplace. They wanted to know the why are they doing this? They wanted flexibility. And then I feel like as we come out of the pandemic, that we're now recognizing, I believe, someone can check my stats, but they are the largest workforce now in the workspace. And so the pandemic in some ways accelerated the millennials' concerns, but I feel like it also pushed it into all the other generations, because now they're like, yeah, why am I coming back? Please tell me why. I just don't want to listen to you give me that order anymore. So in some ways that stuff continues, but it's been absorbed by all of us now in the challenge to go back to work. I'm clearly not a millennial, but hey, it's like you parents, right? Why? That's why everybody needs to think about the purpose and have a really good answer, because just do it doesn't seem to work, especially for people that have lived a life now without a commute. I feel like they've seen a better life. They've had better relationships, even if it was tough during the pandemic, but with their partners, with their children. They don't have a desire to go back to that life anymore. And it just feels, and I asked all of you, like, that genie's out of the bottle, right? I mean, going back.
It's interesting to an extent, and I'd love to pass this off to Dan, but it just made me think of a stat. It was like 50 that I heard Microsoft, I think, referenced. 50% of people want to remain at home because they're more productive there. And 50% of people want to go back to the office because they're most productive there. So, I think for each organization and each team and set, what that looks like is still going to look different, because for some, that's not their favorite place to be every day. And they are craving human connection. So.
Yeah, I think, Erik, you're right. I mean, this is the biggest challenge for organizations right now with respect to planning out that physical space and how they're going to use it is the long term. What does it mean, right? The pandemic happens, the pendulum swings really quickly and really far in one direction, and it hasn't settled back the other way yet. So as organizations try to take an approach for planning, traditionally with real estate, you forecast this out for a 5 or 10 year lease because you capture the best economics in doing that. The problem is they have no idea what 5 years looks like from now. People love working from home right now, but eventually, as these millennials start to have kids, and if they're running around the house when they're trying to get work done, it becomes a little bit bigger of a challenge. Are people going to be burnt out from being home all day, every day, working these long hours? We don't know. I mean, it's definitely a hybrid from here on out, but I think those percentages can shift. And again, that's really why you have to build in a lot of this flexibility when it comes to your space and technology to adjust as these things change.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dan. You're right. Everybody will their own will go back and forth. I'll try 3 days at home, 2 days in the office. I'll go back and forth. I got a question for you. So I'm hoping, although I've heard otherwise, that, that we're beyond sort of ping pong tables and, free Coca-Cola to get everybody back in the office. Like, I, of course, would come back in for a kitchen, but what is the number one thing or one or two things that people want? I know we've talked about collaboration space, but what is a draw to come in the office? If you're not the person that's necessarily gung-ho on it, but I got to go in, like, what is the thing that brings me there?
Yeah, so in our surveys, we ask a specific question about, what are your top 3 reasons to come back to the office? And number 1 is to socialize with their colleagues and coworkers, because they've been missing that in person. I mean, we're still social creatures. Number 2 is to collaborate, which we talked about, and there are technology-enabled ways to do that. But I'm sure many of you have struggled like I have. If I'm trying to put together a presentation with a team, if we're all in remote areas, we have to schedule time to get together. Whereas if we're all in the office together, you can grab somebody and go to the conference room, or grab somebody and go to the kitchen. It might be a little bit easier that way. And then the number 3 reason they want to get back to the office is to either mentor junior members or be mentored by senior staff. And so, there's been a lot of talk about that out of sight, out of mind, concept, and people being promoted or being skipped over because they're not in the office. So I think that is another reason. Frankly, they want to be seen by leadership.
Right. So, and it's interesting because it doesn't do anybody good if everybody comes back to the workspace and then everybody just goes in their office and shuts their door, right? So I would imagine that also just the idea, like using Erik's stat from, I think, LinkedIn, if 50% are want to home and maybe are able to be at home, there's nothing more uninspiring to come in and see a sea of empty cubicles. And I think a lot of our clients and people on this call probably face that, right? That's a horrible thing to come back to the office to.
Actually, I have a question, if I can, for Rae Ann. I was thinking as we were having that discussion, and mentoring and coaching being one of the top 3 reasons for people to come back into the office. And I know you all help and mentor with that. I'm wondering, is part of that reason, again, because of a lack of intentionality there, in the sense that, like, a lot of people coach and manage by saying, I don't know exactly what I do or what the outcomes I'm trying to get to are, but if you watch me long enough, maybe you'll be able to pick up kind of my best practices and avoid the things that I do that are not so wonderful. Whereas, if you're not in the same space, really need to think about, like, what competencies you need to develop. And also, I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, Erik. One of the organizations that we've worked very closely with recently has had that exact experience, because they brought on quite a few people. They hired quite a few people during the pandemic, and they're struggling with how they can ensure that those folks are meeting, understanding what the work of the business is essentially, and how others get their work done and what that means for them. And so we've helped them develop sort of a mentorship program so that they can both remotely and in person engage with people outside of their immediate team members. So we're finding that most organizations have been successful in integrating folks within their own teams because they've had, online team meetings, and they've been really purposeful about getting together as teams or smaller groups, but it's harder whenever you're trying to expose them to what the work of the business and trying to engage them across business lines and across, business operations. And so being very purposeful about that and designing ways for them to sit. And literally we have had folks who sit on the computer and they're watching other people work. Right. And so it seems like maybe a waste of time, or there's a little apprehension about doing that. But what we found is that people then start to ask questions, and it builds a comfort level there. So, I think one of the things that was mentioned in the chat that I maybe is related to this is people are at different places in their lives. Right. Even now, from where they started from a year and a half ago, there may be new family members that have been brought into the fold. There may be, new experiences. Many people have moved. They use this as an opportunity to go to different places geographically. And so for organizations to really recognize the changes that people have had personally, the people side, not just the employee side, but the people side, and being able to mentor folks in that way, and just even having a recognition that people are at different places, and how can we, work together to make sure that the business operations continue, but also that the people and the relationships continue as well.
No, it's a good point. I think that same comment reminded me that they said millennials are 40 now. So the oldest millennials are approaching 40. So they are in child rearing. So, we'll see how this all ends up. That also, with the people moving, a question then for Dan and Erik, because I was thinking about this. Dan, do you see people setting up more like smaller satellite offices where people can sort of come in where they didn't have them before? And then Erik, maybe you can answer some of the technology that people need, sort of if they have a single physical space versus multiple kind of spaces. But yeah, Dan, are you seeing that little hub spoke?
Yeah, absolutely. You took the words right out of my mouth, the hub and spoke model. So, you even see this with, we have clients that are large multinational technology companies based on the West Coast. And rather than doing the Salesforce move, which was building an enormous office tower in San Francisco and bringing everybody in, what they're doing now is taking that out to the suburbs. Because like you said, people have relocated for various reasons. They can work remotely, cost of living. So you're going to have much more of a decentralized model when it comes to office space. You'll still have that headquarters presence, but maybe it's not 100,000 feet. Maybe it's 20,000 feet. And instead we have 5,000-foot satellite offices in 10 or 15 different locations, so that when those workers who are in those areas need to come together, we have a space for them.
Interesting. And Erik, is it easy to build on, and whether it's a multiple space, multiple office spaces, or just sort of I guess I could ask the question this way. So what have you seen for your company, sort of the changes in the technology that people have when they just had one space and now they got half their workforce at home? Is there differences? Is that easy to add on to their original technology, or does that part of sort of a bigger overhaul to be able to have remote workers tap into the existing infrastructure that companies had already?
Yeah, it depends on the organization, I think, and their level of maturity. There are some organizations that we engage with that we're helping support a migration from an on-premise infrastructure to the public cloud, like Microsoft Azure, AWS, and Amazon Web Services, and that certainly helps enable collaboration in certain ways. Depending on where the organization is from a cybersecurity maturity level, there may be various things to think about when it comes to that, both on the technology side, the processy side, as well as like training and security awareness. And then obviously on the office tech side, these smart whiteboards are available, but they're super expensive. So it really depends, for instance, what you plan on doing in those spokes versus what you need everyone to come together in the hub for, versus who can just be wherever they want. And then you can kind of mold the technology around the way you plan on working. But I think Dan made a really good point, which, again, these norms are still settling, and they're gonna change, and they're gonna vary from organization to organization, which is like maybe as a final comment, I'm really excited. Like I didn't know how this thing was going to go, being on the phone with, being on the line with Cresa and Achurch, because all these pieces need to stay in lockstep and work together. Because if you make a change in one without thinking about the others, that misalignment causes inefficiencies and challenges.
Right, absolutely. So we are just about a couple minutes left. So I'd love for each one of you to maybe, so people can have some takeaways. And again, we've got Rae Ann sort of on the people side, Erik on technology, and Dan on space. What would be your number one advice to leadership in terms of what's the first step that they can do now as we enter sort of this brave new world of hybrid? Rae Ann?
Keep in mind that your people are first, and model the behavior that you need and expect of them.
Nice. Dan or Erik?
Yeah, I think it's just be open to change. It's scary sometimes, but you got to embrace it and bring in people that can help with it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of phenomenal thought work going on all over the organization. To the extent that you can bring all that together, it spurs innovation and productivity. And so finding the right way to make technology work for the culture is critical.
I have a wish that we kill email in the next year because I love the idea of the collaboration hubs. But again, I just feel like, can we just do that, please? Because that seems to me when we go in and talk sometimes, that is just where people sort of, they look at email as their big first communication breakdown, right? I can't find stuff, I can't do it. So that would be my wish or advice to leadership.
I will be happy to do an entire hour on why I loathe email, but for another day.
Yeah, exactly. No worries. Well, I want to thank all of you, and I really want to thank the audience as well. I hope that we've all been scanning the chat, so I hope that we got to some of your questions in the areas there. So I appreciate that. And Dan, Rae Ann, Erik, and Julie behind the scenes, thank you so much today, spending time, and all of you for spending time with us. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.